This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. This week, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process is driving a lot of headlines, but there's a far-right faction in Israel that would like to see the peace process end and for Israel to govern the West Bank in the same way it does the land within the Green Line. Jerusalem Post columnist Carolyn Glick is the author of The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East. Whatever Israel chooses to do, it will likely be weighing heavily what its intelligence operatives say. One former operative, Haggai Carmon, has written a series of novels about being an Israeli spy. He joins me to talk about his latest novel, Defection Games. And last, historian Thomas Cahill is reaching for the conclusion of his own series of books, a 7-part series on Western civilization, which includes the 1999 book, The Gifts of the Jews. He joined me to talk about his latest volume, Heretics and Heroes, How Renaissance Artists and Reformation Priests Created Our World. Here's my interview with Carolyn Glick. So what you're advocating with this book is the idea of abandoning the two-state solution and going for basically Israeli governance of everything.
Yeah, I mean, the policy that I set forth here, which you just described, applying Israeli law and sovereignty to all of Judea and Samaria, has now become really the policy of the majority of the members of the Likud Knesset faction. It's the policy of the Beit Yehudi party, which is a major coalition partner in the government. And it's just sort of percolated among larger and larger circles of Israelis because, you know, over the past 20 years, Israelis have recognized the basic fraudulence of the peace process and of the PLO's protestations to peaceful intentions. We can't leave on our own with no deal. We tried that in Gaza, and we've gotten, you know, more than 13,000 missiles, rockets, and mortars shot at Israel from the areas that we vacated. So Israelis are more and more coming to this policy, and what's really pushed it forward was the discreditation of the whole demographic time bomb theory that if we don't do it, we'll be overtaken.
Right. One of the key principles underlying the idea of two states is that of a two-state solution is that Israelis and Palestinians are best side by side rather than together, because Palestinians would come to overtake a Jewish majority over time. And in a democratic system, they'd win.
The problem with that whole argument is that it's based on falsified data that was put out in 1997 by the PLO. That was a Palestinian Authority census that proclaimed that by then there were 2.8 million Palestinians or something in Judea and Samaria. They inflated the numbers by over 1.3 million people.
We've seen Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whom you used to work for, has in 2009 come out for a two-state solution, come out for a Palestinian state, is right now, you know, at least saying that he's engaging in peace talks with an open mind. Do you think that he just doesn't acknowledge the same facts you do? Do you think he's wrong?
No, I think neither are the case. I think he's dealing with certain political realities vis-a-vis the Obama administration that are compelling him to make these statements. But, you know, interestingly, I mean, I don't have a problem with much of what Netanyahu says, because what he says is, we want a true peace and not a piece of paper, and the Palestinians aren't prepared to make an offer to us that we can survive with.
It's not entirely true to say that Netanyahu has these positions as a result of Obama's rhetoric or pressure. Nearly 2/3 of the Israeli electorate for some time has supported a two-state solution. That's the electorate that elected him, and he has stated with some detail why he believes that this is good for the security of Israel.
Yeah, fabulous. I mean, I would support a two-state solution if it enabled Israel to survive. There is no way that the two-state model will work. It can't work. It's never worked. It never will work. It's never going to get anywhere, because the basic guiding ethos of Palestinian nationalism, as I discuss in my book at length, and it's not my words, it's the words of the far-left former foreign minister of Israel under Ehud Barak, Shlomo Ben Ami. The basic ethos of Palestinian nationalism is a negative ethos. That is, it's not directed towards establishing a Palestinian state in any positive sense. Rather, it is geared towards the destruction of the Jewish state. And as a consequence, you're not going to get a Palestinian leader that accepts this. So what we're really talking about in this model is pushing forward for more and more unilateral Israeli concessions to Palestinian terrorists who remain wholly committed to the destruction of Israel.
And now, looking at the world of Israeli espionage, the novelist and former operative Haggai Carmon. This is your fifth book in a series about this character, Dan Gordon. It's pulled from your life experiences in intelligence work. As an international lawyer, lawyers aren't the people we typically associate with the most active spying lives, but you show it to be different.
Well, it's just a fluke. I started working for the U.S. government as an outside attorney representing the U.S. government in Israel in civil litigation. And when the savings and loans in the United States started collapsing, there was a lot of investigative work necessary in Israel about absconding bankers that took off from the United States with some of the money. And the United States was pursuing them. The way it went that I made significant progress in Israel, while the other attorneys in other locations did not. And soon enough, they started giving me cases that were unrelated to Israel. So I was shifting slowly, or maybe rapidly, from being just a lawyer representing the government in Israel to an undercover agent working in more than 30 foreign countries, gathering intelligence.
The idea of doing undercover intelligence work turned into the kind of this book opens with quite a firefight and the kinds of spy thriller activities that we know of from the movies and so forth.
You know, at the time there was a politician in Israel, a very brilliant one, that people said that he was crazy 3 days a week, insane 4 days a week. But nobody could tell which day he was sane and which day he was crazy. So all these 5 books, part of them are true, part of them are fiction, but I'm not telling which is which.
But you had to give up intelligence work at a certain point.
Yeah. About 10 years ago, I realized that it was becoming too dangerous. I was becoming too old and too fat. I wasn't seeing my children. So it was time to say quits. And one of the very last assignments that I had was in the capital of a former Soviet republic. And the representative of Interpol came over, knocked on my door, and said, "You've been identified. You have to leave. The next flight is in about 12 hours. So we'll guard you. We'll have a perimeter protection around the hotel, not next to my room, because then people know where I am." I didn't know what to do. I didn't carry a gun. I wasn't afraid for myself, but I was bored. The TV was in Russian, black and white. The desk there was in the size that I had in the 3rd grade in school. But I had my laptop. So I started writing, and I wrote nonstop for almost 12 hours. The result was Triple Identity, my first book.
Yeah. Finally this week, historian Thomas Cahill. This is the 6th book in what's going to be a 7-book series about Western civilization. We hope. Let's get there. Your book is about the Reformation and the Renaissance, but it begins with a story about philosophers 2,000 years ago, and it ends with people who 3 people who lived in the 20th century, and so you very much feel that we can feel the impact of these historical events as we go farther back and as we look at the present day.
I first started the series, at least in my mind, in Ireland in 1970. My wife and I went there to write a book called A Literary Guide to Ireland, which was published 1,000 years ago by Scribner's. Ireland was then a kind of third world country still. And the further you went away from Dublin, the further you went to the west, the closer you came to people I had never met before. They had a point of view, mentality that I could only compare to the choruses in Greek tragedies.
How so? Okay.
They lived in a cyclical world. They did not live in our world. There was nothing processive about them. Now, I had never thought about the word processive before this this happening. And I started to ask myself, how did we become the people that we are? How did the West become the West? Because we all have things in common. And these people were outside of that, really. They could have been in an ancient Greek play. And so the series begins with how the Irish saved civilization almost as a private joke, because it was a way of connecting with many people about history and saying, well, it isn't always what we think it is.
You talk about this idea that there was a reinvention of Christianity through the Reformation, through Martin Luther. And there was a reinvention of aesthetics and aesthetic sensibilities. And sometimes they have one something to do with the other, sometimes they don't, but they just happened a lot at the same time.
Yes. Also, the Renaissance comes out of Italy. The Reformation comes out of Germany. And though those two countries are very close to one another, they're on either side of the Alps.
They're not the same culture.
They are completely different from one another in many, many important ways. They were then, and you can still see that today.
Well, we definitely see it today. The conflicts between Germany and Italy right now, on fiscal issues,
it's never changed.
Are huge.
It's never really changed. If you this past summer, I was in Rome, and as an American, you always have to sort of gulp when you step off the curb, because there's no such thing as traffic adhering to a particular pattern. You've got to believe that those people are going to stop and not run you over when you go out into the street, because there are no rules. Whereas later in the summer, I went to Berlin, and I decided I had to cross this little street, and I was sick of doing what the Germans do, which is they all wait at lights. They all stop completely. They almost seem to have lost life. They just stand there until the light turns green. Then they move. And I decided to cross the middle of this tiny little street. I did what New Yorkers do, and when I got to the other side, a woman told me off in no uncertain terms, in excellent German, that I was disturbing the fabric of the universe. How dare I?
The fabric of the universe.
Whereas an Italian would just shrug.
Yeah.
They would, So it's that kind of difference that brings about the Renaissance in Italy, where what is really valued is beauty and pleasure. And the Reformation in Germany, where what is really valued is doing things right.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.